Very good morning to one and all, or good afternoon. I can see some of you from the east, perhaps. Would be nice to see some of you show your faces and make this as human as possible. Of late, the whole pandemic experience is like, if some of you have watched Terminator Dark Fate, right? Or something like that, it's starting to become like that. So it'll be really nice to see some of you, and it's good to be back to an Isaac plenary. Do you guys still do this? Like, hey Isaac, does this still happen? Do you do this in Zoom? Do you guys even know what this is?
Most of
Also,
the delegates are not from ISIC, but we are
Not from
from
Isaac.
ISIC as
Okay.
well. Yes.
Okay. So that's good. That's great. Great to be back. Few of you perhaps would know what I'm talking about. So as an alumni, as an alumnus of ISEC, we used to do this thing called "Hey Isaac," and then everybody would yell, "What's up?" And there were other countries, other parts of the world where they would say mean things. But anyway, let me try to bring up my presentation for today morning. Okay, here we go. So let's quickly talk about. We're talking about how do we create an equal world, right? So I wanted to focus on positive reframing of the SDG 10. I hope all of you are having a great time at the Asia Pacific Innovation Challenge, and I'm so thrilled. I'm really excited to be here this morning. My morning. I'm calling you all from Mumbai, and you see, SDG 10 is about reducing inequalities. So the whole idea of this keynote is, what I'll do is I'll try to take you guys through understanding the SDG 10 and what it really means, right? And I'm not an expert in some of the, for example, sociocultural inequalities. That's not really my forte, but I have done policy work, government consulting, and I continue to do sort of economic empowerment. So economic inequality is something that an issue I've been working out throughout my career, right? Um, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about what are the causes of such inequalities, right? What are these historical or systemic causes, and how can they be solved? And so let's explore that, right? So again, my name is Aditya. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Training Vision Global Academy, and it is my pleasure to be with all of you. And so I also want you to watch a quick video because I want you to understand why paying attention, right? Paying keen attention is quite important. Okay, so let me just share my computer sound and bring this back up. Okay, all right. So I'll just play this, and
fall, and it'll be an exercise in building trust between one another. So, Harrison, if you don't mind going first, step up here on this chair and close your eyes.
can you see this? Sorry, I think.
Fall,
Yeah, we can see.
and it'll be an exercise in building trust between one another. So, Harrison, if you don't mind going first, step up here on this chair and close your eyes. All right, and then everybody fill in, and we're going to ask you to fall, and then
The video is stuck, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess. All right. Let me try and I don't know. Sorry about this.
fall.
Okay. So okay, we're having some technical difficulties. Never mind. I'll move on. Basically, it's a trust fall experiment that you can find on YouTube. I'll send you the link. So it's a joy to be back to Isaac. I really have gained a lot from this organization called Isaac. So it's always good to give back. I was with Isaac from 2013 to 2016, and I've traveled maybe 15 countries with this organization, And so really an amazing organization for those who are part of it, or those of you who are probably engaging with it. So congratulations. This is about me. You can find me on LinkedIn, and uh, do connect with me on social media. I love learning. I love engaging with you know millennials, myself being a millennial, also Gen Z. I think you guys are okay too. So before I start this keynote, right, this kind of uh, talking about SDGs, I also want to, you know, take you through a little bit of nostalgia. Okay, so in 2015, the Asia Pacific Innovation Challenge was actually a physical challenge, right? It was not like a digital challenge. And I was part of this conference called Asia Pacific Conference. It was organized by Korea, and I was one of the delegates from ISEC there. And in one of the days, it was a 7 day and plus like few more 1 or 2 weeks of cultural exchange, and we lived in a Korean family. Anyway, the point is that one of the days we were asked to solve for the SDGs, and we were asked to study the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of our own country, right? So I'm guessing that you're all from maybe 26 or more countries. So we had about 26 countries represented at that particular conference. This was in Songdo, Korea, and we were about five of us. This is the picture of me with my Indian delegates and Nepalese delegates. So we were quite Nepal. We were okay with them, I guess. And we we sat together in this workshop where we had to look at all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations and understand where our country is falling short, right? What are the challenges that each and individual country was facing? So we had India, Nepal, we had, of course, Sri Lanka, we had China, we had Australia, we had, the 26 Asian countries, South Korea, but so many different countries, right? So as we started looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, it was like opening a Pandora's box, right? Uh, in almost all of the 17 SDGs, there was a huge gap, right? I mean, there was so much of variation. There was, as for India, I'm talking about India. If you don't know India, India is like a combination of third world and first world together. In its cities, it's quite developed, but in its villages, in its rural areas, it's really bad, right? It's in terms of sustainable development, there's a lot of work, right? Even today, probably especially today after the pandemic. So we looked at 1 to 17 SDGs, and we had this issue where, okay, poverty, yes, that's a major issue in India. A lot of people live below $2. Okay, education, hunger, uh, economic growth, reduced inequalities, a lot of issues. So we went and we presented to the entire group, and it was really like depressing almost, right? Oh my God, right? So many issues with India. And then it was a good 20-minute presentation that these are so many challenges, and how do we start? Where do we solve this? You know, and then came along delegates from Nepal or delegates from maybe Vietnam and Indonesia, and they had similar issues. I mean, they were not really achieving anything in their SDGs. Okay. When we had the delegates from South Korea step up, and I'll try to summarize their presentation in this way. Okay. So these guys came up to the stage and they said, hey guys, the SDG issues with South Korea are that we sincerely believe that English speaking is a crisis and we have to solve it, right? And that's the only issue we have. I think every other issue we're good. Okay. So we were kind of shocked, right? We were like, what are you guys talking about? You don't have poverty, you don't have you don't have a climate crisis, you don't have economic crisis, you have nothing, you just have English, and that's a crisis. How can you call English a crisis, right? And that too, they were all very fluent in English. Their crisis was they just had to improve a little bit in English. So for me, this was a big shock. And I mean, as you continue to travel, right, as many of you, which I encourage to travel, not for tourism's sake, but to really learn from other countries and cultures, you come to understand that when you look at different countries, there's a huge inequality, not only not only economic, but in terms of other kinds of development as well. So SDG 10 is really about uh, inequality within and among countries. Okay, so income inequality before COVID-19 was actually decreasing according to the UN report. But then again, like I'll come to it. Uh, there's a lot of issues now, right? The development finance. This is something that I also talk about, right? So these are some things that are struggling after COVID-19. It's really a big issue, right? Uh, with COVID-19, the most vulnerable groups are really hit the hardest, especially old people, children, even youngsters, right? Or persons with disability, the people who earn the wages, right? So anyway, what is this SDG 10 and what is it? Let's understand. So every sustainable goal, if you don't know or know it, has a bunch of sub targets or indicators. Okay, so there's 17 SDGs, but there's 169 sub targets, sub goals. And I mean, if you read SDG 10, you see, okay, we need to have a better income growth, and improve the income growth of the bottom 40%. If you look at the socio-economical political inclusion of everybody, that means everybody should be participating in democracy. I think most of Asia Pacific are democratic countries, so good for us. But how do we make the democracy work better so that everybody gets a representation, right? And I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about it. And make sure there are policies that protect. They have social protection. There are wage protection. I mean, today we're talking about things like remote work, and one of you may be working for 5 companies at the same time, and that could be your career, as opposed to working in one company for your entire career, right? So, but who protects you, right? You don't have. Do you have medical insurance? Do you have, I don't know, life insurance? Do you have pension fund, right, for a remote worker? So these are certain things that are really challenging, and policy issues are there. And reduce inequalities of outcome, uh, and discrimination, right? I mean, I'll talk about it: race, religion, gender, disabilities, so many things. So again, if you look at a few other indicators, sub targets, make sure that the voice and representation is equal in decision making, right, globally. That the small countries, they don't get bullied, right? For example, let's say there's Cyprus, and Cyprus, if climate change worsens and sea levels rise too fast in the next 20 years, maybe Cyprus is a tiny island, half of Cyprus may be underwater, right? But does Cyprus have a say in the UN General Assembly? So it's basically making sure there's special and differential treatment for developing countries in trade and other matters, right? And proper migration of mobility of people, right? And this is another interesting thing that I hope to touch upon, especially concerns Asia. Asia is what? Asia is the youngest continent in the world, and I think India is the youngest country within Asia. And this next 10 years or 20 years is the decade of Asia, is the decade of Asia. Let me tell this again. It's not going to happen again. This next 10, 20 years is the McKinsey did a really nice report. They called it the white tiger, or the uh, rising white tiger, or something like that, on Asia. They had a fantastic report on Asia and why Asia is the place to be. Okay, so how do we make sure that there's equal opportunities, equal voices, and equality in wealth and in socio-cultural aspects, right, in Asia? And how do you make sure that there's finance and things like that? So let's talk about the first kind of inequality, right? And I like to call this the religion, race, and caste gap. Okay, you could have other gaps. You could have other kind of discrimination gaps, right? There's a lot of different gaps. So why do you guys, and I want you to be active on chat, so just keep texting. What do you think is the root cause of these gaps? What do you think is the root cause of the religion gap, or the race gap, or in some countries, I don't know about other countries, but in India, it's still funny to think there are casteism, right? Where there's people of different communities who are marginalized and discriminated against. Distrust. Pallavi says distrust. Okay. Anybody else? Why do you think these gaps are there? Right? So what I like to think of when you say socio-cultural inequalities, Sumera says societal conditioning that creates biases. Okay. Superiority complex, Kanchan. Sujita says stereotypical thoughts. Okay. Lack of belief in trust. Okay. Okay. It's very interesting. Misunderstanding. Okay. So let me kind of give you a bit of a spin on it, right? So if you look at the religion or socio-cultural inequalities and root cause of these inequalities, these are all number one historical, right? These are all number one historical, and many of you are right. There is this reason for superiority complex. There is social conditioning and all sorts of things. Uh, if you really look at what is going on with these gaps, right? We really think about it deeply, right? You come to understand that number one, there's a need there was a need for domination that unfortunately that was there. I don't say need, but maybe a desire for domination, right? A want for domination. The colonial races, for example, the countries, right? The European colonialists, they tried to kind of dominate on the grounds of race and color. That, okay, you know what, a certain race, Caucasian race or whatever race, is somehow superior genetically, intelligence, and all. We know from research and we know from science that's completely not true. uh, you know Genetically we're all 99.9 whatever similar, and there's nothing that goes to say that there's a race that is superior than others. And a lot of slave trade happened. And I mean, this is not so when you think about this problem, it's a 1,000 year or it's a 3,000-year-old problem, right? Or a 2,000-year-old problem. It's not a new problem. Maybe religion is still probably a younger problem. Maybe it's a 500 or 1,000-year-old problem when religions really came across, and then castes formed, and so everybody wanted to dominate over certain limited resources. And the problem, I also think, is that if you really think about it really deeply, you realize that there's a lot of abundance around. Okay, it's very important to understand when we're talking about SDG 10. There's a lot of abundance around. And what do I mean by, okay, abundance, right? If you cover the whole planet, right? If you, okay, can anybody guess how much gold, right? The metal, precious metal gold is on the planet. Can anybody guess? So I'll, we're short on time, so I'll break it to you guys, right? So if you take the entire gold on the planet, you can cover the entire planet of Earth knee deep, the entire surface. That's how much gold it is there. Okay, you can argue that no, not everything is accessible, it's hard to extract, there is mining, there is processing, there is design, there is, you know that's why it's expensive. Sure, okay. But what I'm trying to say is the planet has ample resources. There's a lot of natural capital. We always think about capital as, okay, mines and minerals, agriculture, manufacturing. I mean, that's how we think about industry, but there's also natural capital. Ultimately, without the natural capital, without agriculture, everything falls off, right? So why am I talking about this? The mindset those days were, let's conquer as much land and territory, as many natural resources. If I conquer, let's say, a neighboring country, I control their assets, their natural assets, and I get to dominate, right? So for such reasons of power struggle or power whatever, we had the race gap that came out. And then the religion, that's a tricky one, right? Like religion, what is it? Ideology. you know it's all about ideology. And there's a, unfortunately, with all due respect to all religions, there is a lot of dogma surrounding many religions, right? A lot of dogma, which is blind belief or blind faith. And there's a lot of kind of lot goes to say that particular religions were used to control people as well, right? Certain ideologies were used to control. It's there in the history, right? I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. But I found this interesting article. I was reading The Economist. I just want to read this really quick, okay? And this was a survey they did in India recently. And they studied that actually there's a lot of commonalities between Hindus and Muslims basing on this survey. And what they said was the overlap between Hindus and Muslims is particularly strong. Equal proportions of both religions believe in evil eye, right? They have this thing called evil eye. I don't know if you guys know it, and karma, and also agree that women should be stopped from marrying out of their faith. So both religions believe that. Fully 97% of Hindus say they are proud to be Indian, and 95% of Muslims in India say they're proud to be Indian, right? 80% say they respect other faiths, and respecting other faiths is part of their religious belief. 79% of Muslims say the same thing, right? So basically, it's a very interesting report where they say that, you know what, there's a lot of similarity between the behaviors of these people in these religions. And they're so, for example, animal sacrifice, it's there in both religions, Hinduism and maybe just different animals, but in South India it's not so much. In both religions they don't do it. So it's a really interesting thing. So why don't we as humanity sort of look at what is the common thing between us instead of focusing on the difference? So that's food for thought for all of you, to think about socio cultural equality. If you want to strive for that, can we think about what unites us rather than what you know differentiates us? What you know? So I really like Dr. Jane Goodall and or John Naisbitt was an economist, and what he says that in 21st century it's not about technology and all. It's really about what it means to be human that's going to expand. I was meeting somebody who is a New Zealander who is of, say, Japanese origin, and who is an American citizen now. Okay, I have a friend who's part American, part Japanese. So what can you be racist against that person? I don't know. Right. So the future is, that's where we're going at. So and and Dr. Jane Goodall says just amazing. It's really about the heart, right? We're at heart, we're all one and the same. It's really about uh, not how we dress, what we do. So coming to the second thing, and this is where I'm going to focus the rest of my keynote, and we're going to dive deep into this, and I'm also going to present you some of the solutions or some of the good case practices, some cases that are actually working out in the world, right, with this issue. So we know that the 0.01% of the world own more than the next 440% of the world, right? And that's just absurd. That's just crazy. And there's this really nice TED talk by Dan Ariely that I want all of you guys to check, explore on SDG 10, where basically he does an interview, he does a survey of common people like us, and says, how much wealth do you think the top 20% own? Okay, or the bottom 20% own? The bottom 20% really own something like 1.5% of total wealth that is available there on the planet. Okay. And there's something known as the poverty line, which is if you're living less than $2 a day, right? That's, and even today, right? And I think because of the pandemic it just got worse. Even today we have 2 billion people, right? 2 people out of every 7 people or 8 people, 2 people out of every 8 people are living below $2 a day. And then one of the economists also created a washing machine line, right? So how many people can actually afford a washing machine? So the the people who can afford a washing machine are also like 3 people out of the 8 people can afford a washing machine, or 2 people, I guess, 2 or 3 people, right? And then there's that 1% of people who can fly every day, who can afford to be on a plane every day, right? So something like that, right? So, and that's only maybe not even 1%. That's very few people. Okay. So the whole idea is that there are 3 ways to think about economic inequality. One thing is, it's easy to say income gap. Okay, people in a developing country, if you're from I don't know, Indonesia, let's say, it's still I guess in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, developing, and compare that to, let's say, Norway, right, or Sweden, or compare that to US, or compare that to Singapore, where my company is actually originated at. And if you look at the kind of salary structures, right, what would you draw if you are a IT engineer? Your salary in India would be annually. would be maybe $5,000, and that's a very good salary, right? That's around, or for a fresher who's an IT engineer, or maybe $7,000 if you're really good, or maybe $10,000, right? Annually per year, right? We know that, in countries like Europe or in the US, for example, we have an annual income of maybe $35,000 and starting there, right? That's the least that you can get annually. So there's a huge income gap, and people can say, hey, you know what, Aditya, countries are different, the lifestyle is different, expenses are different, you need that money there. Okay, sure, right? I'll indulge you, I'll humor you that we need to pay, but what about the wealth gap? Okay, and many of the youngsters today, and this is something that I want all of you to really think about, is wealth and income are completely different. Okay, I think I saw this CNBC documentary called Make It, right, on a person who lives on 90,000 US dollars or 120,000 US dollars per annum salary in the Bay Area in California. And she actually she complains, or she says she struggles about how, saving money is so difficult for her, right? Because the lifestyle that she's used to. And even if you are active on Twitter, I'm quite active on Twitter, you see that, and I keep having these conversations with people from the Valley, from Bay Area. And recently I came across a tweet thread where they said, you know what, and what they're doing in US after the pandemic is everybody's moving away from Bay Area to Miami, where the taxes are low, the rent is low and all, because they're people, millennials and Gen Z, were actually waking up and saying, you know what, if I have a good salary, that's not enough. I need to have wealth. I need to i need to i need to have long term assets, right? I need financial freedom and financial security. Okay, just because if I have a good salary and I'm spending 90% of my salary, that does not mean I'm wealthy, right? But if I'm able to save 40 or 50 or even 70% of my salary, and I'm able to invest that and make money out of money, right? Not make money out of your time, but make money out of money, right? That's when you're wealthy. And the wealth gap can also be understood in another way, right? If you think about it, it's easy for a millionaire to become a billionaire than for someone who's not a millionaire to become a millionaire also, right? It's the chances are easy, the odds are higher, right? If you have $5 million, you can make 25 million quite easily. But if you're having maybe just $30,000, making 3 million would be quite challenging. And then the third thing that's really really important, and I think that often is ignored and to our own peril, which is the innovation gap. A lot of patents, and I didn't have time to put that map, but a lot of patents, if there's this chart on, I don't know who did this chart, but there is 3D sort of bar chart or whatever chart on the number of patents owned by different countries, right? And if you look at India, and I know India well, so I can talk about India. Every year, on average, there are 55,000 patents that are applied by India. Okay, 55,000. And you compare that to a country like Sweden or Germany or Japan, each of these countries every year put out 150,000 patents or more. Okay, I think China is the highest, and then after China is US. I think so. What I'm trying to say is 1.3 billion people creating very less 55,000 patents. Just look at it. How many people are actually innovating in a country like India? And if you're curious, search your own country, be it, I don't know, you may be from Vietnam or Philippines or Bangkok. Where are you from? Just look at how many patents does your country apply for every year, right? And I really like Kate Raworth, who talks about the economic inequality in a very interesting way. She wrote this book called Donut Economics, and she says, you know what, everybody says GDP is the output and it is a primary measure of progress, which is gross domestic product. It is how much of goods, the total value of goods and services within a particular country, within an economy. But then what she says is, who is measuring per capita income? How is that distributed, right? it's good to see India is growing at say 8% or whatever, or your country is going by whatever percent, right? But how does it really, um, how is it distributed? And there are talks about universal basic income and all sorts of things, which I'll leave it for your workshops to do so. So in my view, like, there's root causes of the wealth gap, there's relics of colonialization, in the sense that uh, is simply that, we've not been dealt the same, uh, the hands that have been dealt were really unfair to start with for many of the countries which are developing countries, um, like take sub-Saharan Africa or some of the worst hit economies in Asia. They've been very depleted, right? And if you look at this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? So there are different habits also, right? So a family generationally which has been doing business, it's easy for that family to do business because they know business, they understand, and they know what it means to save, they know what it means to invest. But if you look at families which are hand to mouth, as they say, right, which are just living on the threshold of poverty or whatever, right, or just covering their income, for them investing in education is difficult, let alone investing in wealth. Okay, so it's really difficult. So habits of wealth creation are very different, and they're not there in the culture everywhere, right? And if you look at unequal opportunities, yeah, just because you're having a special need, maybe you're autistic, right, or just because you're a woman, and I don't know, I mean, in Asia it's funny because there are cultures which are matriarchal, not really patriarchal, and even men get there's some bias against men, and that was funny for me to discover when I was traveling in Asia. But in many of the countries what we see is also like men get favored, and there's all kinds of I would say discrimination, even abuse and harassment that goes against certain genders or transgenders, whatever, right? So the rich get richer, poor get poorer, and that's also like how the system is designed, unless the government is conscious and has some things. And and again, don't want to go into depth, but the risk appetite is low, right? The risk appetite of someone from a, so especially if you look at three of the movements which give us hope, right? If you look at three of the movements which give us hope, there's a lot of fight back against Islamophobia, especially after the ISIS. And people who are fighting Islamophobia are also coming and saying, you know what, it's not the religion, it's the ideology, and which some people who are radicalized, who are extremists, tend to connect and identify as religion. But many of the religious leaders actually deny it. They don't stand and support that, right? That ideology of extremism or radicalism. And it's nothing like it's belonging to certain religion or certain geography. It's, we had seen people from all of the world countries, Europe or America themselves, right? Americans also being sort of radicalized and sort of extremist, so that's, so it's an ideological thing, right? If you look at Black Lives Matter, this is another huge movement that we're not, Asia being very multicultural, we haven't seen this, right? But in other parts of the world we had this whole movement towards racial equality. And even basing on your sexual orientation, right? Whatever is your natural orientation or natural identification of your gender, right? Who is the society to deny you that right? So there's that freedom. So a lot of progress, a lot of activism is being done, and I think it's for good reason. And it's finally people are waking up. Finally, the smallest of the voices are speaking the loudest, right? Finally. So anyway, now let me come, and maybe I have 8 minutes, Sumedh, I'll try to wrap up. So three things that I think we can use to solve SDG 10, right? Some levers. I think three of these are policy and development finance, technology and innovation, and youth leadership. um, and Here's how I like to think about it, right? So inequality is this huge problem. You say, like, Aditya, how do you even go about solving this? Come on, it's not, it's for somebody like, I don't know, Joe Biden or some Lee Hsien Loong to solve this, right? We're too small people, we're youth, how can we solve this? But hold your thought, right? I think any change, any transformation in economy or society or culture, really the fulcrum is always the leadership, right? And the lever is, and there are levers like policy and or finance or technology and innovation or social entrepreneurship. Okay. And even with, and you can really solve for this problem, and I'll give you some hopes, right? So let's look at some examples of a policy initiative, right? And I'll be very fast, and maybe if time persists I can even take a few questions. um, a policy initiative in government of India is, we've done this thing called Niti Ayog, where a certain part of the government called Atal Innovation Mission was created to support youth entrepreneurship, right? And what they've done is, I think they started maybe 7 8 years ago or even before. What they really started was, you know what, let's start tinkering labs for children to experiment even at a school level, to experiment with technology, with arts, with science, right? So they went ahead and worked with so many 7,200 schools to create these tinkering labs where children can play and innovate and prototype and learn on different technologies. I think about 100, I think 200, this data is outdated, probably 200 incubation centers have been set up around India. Definitely more than 2,000 startups. And one of the interesting things that government has done was they have called in 5,000 mentors of change, which is people like you and me from the industry, to come in and say pro bono, voluntarily support these startups. Right? And I think this is a fantastic policy initiative. In fact, these centers, labs are funded. There's multi-billion dollars of investment in this area to improve the innovation. And I think this connects with the innovation gap we were talking about, if you remember very well, right? This is an initiative. So this is just one idea. So maybe in your own country, in Philippines or Bangkok, this may or wherever you are from, right? Is this happening? Is in Pakistan? Is it happening? In Bangladesh is it happening? Just think about it, right? If you look at development finance, uh, this is a project that actually we are at TVI. By the way, I previously founded a ACIC, Atal Community Innovation Center myself in south of India. We had a smooth process, a very fair process. There was no corruption. There was nothing. It's a very transparent, clear process of receiving financial support. And in Kerala, in again the south of India, they call it the God's own country within the country. It's a beautiful green, hilly place where literacy has been quite high, but employability was very low, right? So Asian Development Bank gave a loan of $100 million to develop, I think maybe 20 or 15 such skill parks. And this is a picture of the skill park, a really nice skills park, right? To to help to create that infrastructure, to the hardware, the technology that is needed for youth and youngsters to upskill themselves and get a job in India or even abroad, you know. And companies like TVI, we're working with them and supporting this initiative, right? And this is another favorite example of social entrepreneurship. You guys all know Chris Evans, right? Chris Evans started this thing called A Starting Point, right? It's ASP, a starting point. I think this is a very interesting, inspiring project personally to me, because if you think about it, uh, in many of so-called democracies, the political debate culture is not there. A culture of having politicians express their views to the point on on the same issue, right, from different parties, it's not, it's very rare to have, right? And I think there's something that we can really learn from in terms of US, and there's many things that are wrong there also, but let's look at the best. And if you look at what Chris Evans with this project, a starting point, what he's doing is, if you Google a starting point, you get that he's looking at different people from Democrat and Republican parties talk about the same issue, let's say death penalty or minimum wages, or should we build a wall in the south of America, right, to prevent Mexicans coming in. So the point is that he's creating these videos. He's not saying he supports one side or the other, but he's working as a neutral body, and he's using a lot of technology. He's using a lot of science, a lot of technology. And if someone says something that is not factual or data, the data is not correct, he is able to actually correct that and provide verified media, verified journalism, right? um, and another example, and I'm guessing there would be some coding tech geeks or coding ninjas or whatever you are, but uh, this is a really nice project called Magnet, right? Magnet is modular applied general equilibrium tool, which is a tool that you use to study you know macroeconomics at a global level, like trade, supply and demand of certain commodities, and etc. So it's basically it's a economic model of the whole planet. Like it's basically like you put in a lot of different input data, and and you can actually it's a simulation, right? It's a simulation of the global economy, and it predicts, it kind of gives you insights on prices, production, trade at country to country level, right? So for example, you can study uh, if EU and US have signed a trade agreement, how does that impact Dutch agribusiness? Or if there is Brexit that is happening, right? How does Brexit impact fishing and fisheries in Europe? Okay. Or if staple prices are fluctuating, they're changing, then how does that impact poverty in India? It's fascinating, right? What you can do with science and technology and economic modeling. Yeah, so this is a really cool tool that they've built and they're using. Um, and I'll also give you another example of business for good. And I think business for good can create direct impact and indirect impact. Okay, so always remember that when you're creating a solution towards SDG 10, it need not be direct, it can be very indirect as well, right? Direct impact, one of my favorite projects in the world in terms of direct economic development is Taobao villages. If you know what Taobao is, in China, and China is still the economic miracle. I mean, what China did to their economy was, it's something worth studying, right? Of course, the government, everything is criticized, and that's all okay. Nobody's perfect, but let's look at what's good, what we can learn, right? Let's look at the beauty there, right? So what this company, Alibaba's company Taobao, went and did was, they went to different villages and product, and they said, let us teach you how to manufacture a certain product. They had this concept of one village, one product, and they taught this entire village. They said, we'll teach you how to manufacture toys, or how to manufacture furniture, how to manufacture, I don't know, a certain good or whatever it is, right? Electronics for that matter, and how to also take nice photos and sell it on e-commerce. Okay. So, and they looked at these villagers as partners, right? They did not say, we'll employ you, we'll pay you money and salary. They didn't say that. They said that we will help you start your own business, you hold equity, and you're a business partner of us, you're not an employee of us. And miraculously, many of these villagers have become millionaires. You study this project, they've become millionaires, villagers becoming millionaires. It's a beautiful project. I think we should really look at replicating this in different ways. So another way of indirect impact is, if you look at stock trading apps, and I've taken some Indian companies, Grow and Zerodha are quite popular in India. During the pandemic, there's no way to invest, but if you see a lot of financial investment in financial markets, in stocks and equities, or in exchange traded funds or mutual funds, has really grown up. Okay. And people like you and me, and if you Google on YouTube, you will see how to invest in different languages, in Hindi, in Telugu in India for that matter, in Bahasa perhaps. You will see a lot of YouTube people talking about it in their own language and really democratizing this financial literacy. And so these apps are private companies. They had no intention to create equality, but they are creating equality because they're creating wealth for a lot of people, as a lot of people participate in financial markets. A really nice company that I'm looking at is Masterworks. It's a US company. What they're doing is, rich people typically invest in art, right? By Picasso or whatever, Jackson Pollock paintings. So they're saying you can fractionally own units of art through this company called Masterworks. It's a very interesting thing, right? Or Prosper, my friend started this company in India. He's doing investing in different languages in vernacular. So in US, they're talking about breaking up the big tech, and there's this whole committee on anti-competition. Like, how do we split Facebook? How do you split Google? They have too much power, and I don't have time. I think I'm out of time. So I recommend 3 authors: James Crabtree, Anand Giridharadas, Scott Galloway, and I want you to also like improve your own empathy, improve your own compassion, by becoming more aware, reading up, develop your focus, take up a meditation practice, and try to really become human and transform yourself and upskill yourself, right? And I wish you all the very best in terms of today's workshop, and I hope I was able to trigger some innovative ideas in your minds as you aim to solve SDG 10. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for Sustainable Development Goals track and Diversity Inclusion track. We will have a mentorship session as well today with Aditya, so stay tuned for that. Thanks a lot again for your time, Aditya, and see you in the afternoon or evening for you.